The cold was a discipline. Elias Vance had made it his drill instructor, the architect of his days. It sharpened the air in his lungs each morning and laid a crystalline stillness over the Colorado peaks that ringed his self-imposed prison. His cabin, built with the same meticulous precision he had once used to assemble a rifle, stood as a bulwark against a world he no longer wished to engage. Every log was flush, every floorboard swept clean, every object in its designated place. It was a fortress of order against the chaos of memory, a barracks for a soldier whose war was over but whose battles raged on within the silent chambers of his heart. He was 46 years old, but felt ancient, a relic weathered by losses that had carved canyons into his soul. His mornings began before the sun, with a routine as rigid as a field manual. 100 push-ups on the cold wood floor, the burn in his muscles, a familiar grounding pain, a splash of icy water to his face, a shock to the system that felt like a necessary penance. Coffee, black and bitter, was brewed with a military-grade focus. He would stand at the large window overlooking the valley, mug in hand, and watch the world awaken in shades of gray and blue. He saw the beauty. He acknowledged it with the detached appreciation of a reconnaissance specialist assessing terrain, but he did not feel it. Feeling was a vulnerability, a breach in the perimeter he had so carefully constructed around himself since Sarah's car had slid on black ice, and since his partner, Rex, had taken a bullet meant for him in the dust of Kandahar. The ghosts were quietest when he was moving. Grief was a sniper, most dangerous when you were still. So he kept moving. He split wood with a rhythmic, punishing force, the axe rising and falling, each crack of timber a small, satisfying victory over the inertia of sorrow. He maintained the long gravel drive, clearing it of stones and debris with an obsessive focus. He ran the trails that snaked through the pines, his lungs heaving, his legs burning, chasing an exhaustion so profound it might, for a few precious hours of sleep, finally silence the echoes. He had come here to be alone, to let the silence and the mountains cauterize a wound that refused to heal. He had built his life into a wall, and it was working. He was numb. He was safe. His sister, Chloe, was the only one who still regularly tried to breach his defenses. Her calls came every Sunday, a bright, insistent signal from a world of warmth and connection he had forsaken. That afternoon, her voice came through the satellite phone, crackling with static and an energy that felt alien in the profound quiet of his cabin. "Eli, it's going to be a bad one," she had said, her tone laced with a familiar sisterly concern that he both resented and, in a deeply buried part of himself, craved. "Are you stocked up? Do you have enough firewood?" "I'm fine, Chloe," he had replied, his voice a low rumble, the words clipped and functional. He stood staring at the empty dog bed in the corner, the one he could never bring himself to throw away, Rex's bed. Its plaid wool was faded, but he could still see the faint impression where the noble German shepherd's body used to lie. "Fine is not an answer, it's a deflection," she had shot back, her voice softening. "I worry about you up there, all alone. It's not healthy." He did not answer, instead tracing the rim of his coffee mug with his thumb. "Just promise me you'll check your generator fuel, and maybe drive into town for some extra supplies before it hits for me, Eli. Or, please." The word, please, was her secret weapon. It was the one command he had trouble disobeying. He had agreed with a monosyllabic grunt, the conversation ending as abruptly as it began. He had no intention of going to town. His supplies were adequate. His generator was fueled. Her concern felt like a meddlesome intrusion, a reminder of an emotional ecosystem he was no longer equipped to navigate. But as the afternoon wore on, her words gnawed at him. The sky outside had begun to take on a heavy, leaden hue, the color of an unpolished gun barrel. The wind was picking up, whispering through the pines, with a low, mournful sound that scraped at his nerves. An old instinct, the one that had kept him alive in places where the weather could kill as quickly as a bullet, began to surface. Check your gear. Verify your position. Prepare for the worst. Against his better judgment, he found himself pulling on his heavy winter coat and grabbing the keys to his truck. The drive to the small town of Aspen Ridge was a necessary evil, brief foray into enemy territory. He would be quick, in and out. No small talk. Just a few extra cans of propane and some batteries. A mission, nothing more. He felt a familiar armor settle over him as he steered the truck down the winding mountain road, a cold discipline that was his only remaining comfort. The first flakes of snow, large and wet, began to fall, melting against the windshield like fleeting, icy tears. The storm did not arrive. It descended. It fell from the bruised sky, not as a gentle curtain of snow, but as a furious, white-out assault. The wind howled, a predatory beast clawing at the truck, and the world beyond his windshield dissolved into a swirling vortex of white. Elias gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles pale, navigating by instinct and a deep familiarity with the treacherous mountain pass. He had gotten the supplies, enduring the forced pleasantries of Martha at the general store, her kind, knowing eyes, seeing far more than he was comfortable with. Now on the return journey, the mission had changed from simple resupply to pure survival. The road was a ghost, a memory buried under a rapidly deepening shroud of snow. It was a flicker of movement at the edge of his high beams that made him slow down. A dark shape against the blinding white, impossibly out of place in this maelstrom. He squinted, leaning forward, his operator's senses screaming that something was wrong. He pulled the truck to a halt, its engine a low growl against the shriek of the wind. He grabbed the high-powered flashlight from the glove compartment, its beam cutting a sharp focused path through the chaos. He saw it again, a shape, low to the ground, near a snow-choked ditch by the side of the road. His first thought was a deer, or maybe a coyote, caught in the storm. But as he stepped out of the truck, the wind tearing at him, he saw it clearly. It was a dog, a German shepherd. The animal was half buried in a snowdrift, her beautiful sable coat matted with ice. She was lying on her side, shivering violently, but her head was up. Her eyes, intelligent and amber, were fixed on him, not with aggression, but with a desperate, silent plea that struck him with the force of a physical blow. As he moved closer, the beam of his flashlight revealed the source of her immobility. A dark stain marred the snow beneath her flank, and her back leg was twisted at an unnatural angle. But it was not her own plight that held her attention. Tucked beneath her, sheltered from the worst of the wind by her own freezing body, were two tiny puppies, whimpering, their eyes barely open. She was a mother, using the last of her strength to be a shield for her young. Something inside Elias, a tectonic plate of frozen grief that had not shifted in years, gave a violent shuddering lurch. He saw not just a dog, but a soldier holding the line. He saw nobility in the face of impossible odds. He saw sacrifice. He understood, in his very bones, the cold, the wind, the isolation of his own heart. It all fell away, replaced by a singular, clarifying focus, a mission. He knelt in the snow, the cold seeping through his jeans, and spoke in a low, calm voice. The same tone he had used to soothe frightened soldiers and steady his own nerve in the dark. "Easy now," he murmured. "Easy, girl. I'm here to help." The mother shepherd watched him, a low rumble in her chest, but she did not move. She seemed to understand. He could see the exhaustion in her eyes, the life flame flickering low. He had to act fast. The puppies were fading, their whimpers growing weaker. He unzipped his coat, the icy wind biting at him instantly, and carefully, one by one, scooped the tiny shivering bodies into his arms. He tucked them inside his jacket, against the warmth of his chest, their small forms barely making a bulge. They were so fragile, their lives hanging by the thinnest of threads. One was bolder, squirming and nudging against him. The other was still, a quiet, watchful soul whose faint tremor of life felt terrifyingly tenuous. Now for the mother. It could not lift her without causing more injury. He ran back to his truck, his mind racing, cycling through tactical options, as if he were planning an extraction. He grabbed a heavy wool blanket from the back seat. It was Sarah's, the last thing she had bought for their home, a soft plaid thing she loved to curl up in on cold nights. The scent of her, faint and floral, still clung to it. He hesitated for only a second, the memory a sharp, unexpected pain. Then he pushed it down. The mission came first. He returned to the dog and gently, expertly worked the blanket underneath her, using it as a makeshift gurney. He wrapped her as best he could, her amber eyes never leaving his face, a silent, profound trust passing between them. Getting her into the back of the truck was a brutal, physically demanding ordeal. The wind fought him, the snow slick under his boots, his muscles strained, the old ache in his shoulder, from a long ago fall flaring to life, but he did not stop. He operated with a cold, clear purpose, his body a tool to be used until the objective was complete. Finally she was in, settled on the blanket in the covered bed of the truck. He closed the tailgate, shutting out the storm, and climbed back into the driver's seat, the two puppies stirring against his chest. He turned the heat on full blast, the roar of the fan filling the cab. He looked at the fragile creatures nestled against him, then thought of the noble mother in the back. For the first time in 2 years, Elias Vance was not alone, and he was terrified. The cabin, once his sanctuary of sterile order, was immediately breached. Life, in its messiest, most desperate form, had invaded his fortress. He laid Sarah's blanket, now stained with mud and blood, the floor before the great stone hearth and gently placed the mother shepherd upon it. Her breathing was shallow, her eyes clouded with pain, but she managed a weak thump of her tail when he brought the puppies and placed them beside her, where they immediately began to nurse. He worked with a practiced efficiency, his hands, so accustomed to the cold mechanics of weapons, now surprisingly gentle. He cleaned her wound as best he could, a nasty gash on her haunch, and splinted her broken leg with 2 pieces of kindling and strips torn from an old t-shirt. He built a fire, the flames roaring to life, casting a warm, flickering glow that pushed back against the encroaching darkness. The light danced across the room, illuminating the chaos. Muddy paw prints marred his pristine floor. The scent of wet dog, earth, and blood replaced the clean, sterile smell of pine and solitude. He warmed a bowl of beef broth, holding it to the mother's mouth, coaxing her to drink. She took a few laps, her gaze fixed on him with that same unnerving intelligence. He named her in his mind, Sheba, a queen, fighting for her kingdom. The puppies were a study in contrasts. The bolder one, a male with a white patch on his chest, stumbled around on clumsy paws, sniffing everything, his tail a blur of untamed optimism. Elias thought of him as the foolish hero. Buddy, the other, a slightly smaller male, all dark fur, remained pressed against his mother's side. He was the watchful soul, his dark eyes observing everything with a deep, weary caution that seemed too old for such a small creature. This one, he decided, was Shadow. Shadow was the one who worried him. He was weaker, and when Elias reached for him, he flinched, a tremor of fear running through his tiny body. It was a reaction Elias understood completely. It was the recoil of a spirit that had known trauma from its first breath. He saw his own reflection in those dark, frightened eyes, a soul braced for the next blow. A fierce, unfamiliar wave of protectiveness washed over him. He would not let this one fail. He would not lose another. The hours bled together into a long night of vigil. The storm raged outside, a symphony of fury, but inside the cabin, a fragile peace had settled. Ilas sat in his armchair, not sleeping, just watching. He watched Sheba's breathing deepen as the warmth seeped into her bones. He watched Buddy's clumsy attempts to play, tumbling over his own paws in a silent, comical ballet. And he watched Shadow, who eventually, tentatively, crept from his mother's side and curled up on the edge of Elias's boot, a small, warm weight that felt like an anchor in the storm of his own soul. At some point, Elias felt a wet nose press against his calloused hand. He looked down. Sheba had lifted her head and was looking at him, her amber eyes clear and full of a gratitude so profound it felt like a physical presence in the room. He rested his hand on her head, his fingers stroking the soft fur behind her ears. The wall inside him, the one he had built brick by painful brick, began to crumble. The next morning, the world was buried in white. The storm had broken, leaving behind a landscape of profound silence and impossible beauty. The pristine scene, however, could not mask the reality of the situation. Sheba needed a real doctor. Her leg was a mess, and he suspected she had an infection. His own skills were limited to battlefield triage. He used the satellite phone, the signal weak, and called the only number he knew in town for such things, the Aspen Ridge Veterinary Clinic. A woman's voice, calm and warm, answered. He explained the situation in his usual clipped, practical terms. Found a dog, German Shepherd, broken leg, other injuries, 2 pups, need a vet. The pass is completely snowed in, the voice replied. No one can get up there. My name is Dr. Aris Thorne. Can you tell me exactly what you've done for her so far? Elias relayed his treatment, and he could almost hear her nodding in approval on the other end. She gave him instructions, her voice a soothing balm of professionalism, telling him how to check for dehydration and signs of fever. As soon as the plows get through, I'll come up myself, she promised. Until then, keep them warm and safe. You did a good thing. He hung up, the compliment making him vaguely uncomfortable. He had not done a good thing. He had performed a function. He had executed a mission. Yet, as he looked at the small family sleeping by the fire, he knew it was more than that. Before Eris could make it, however, another visitor arrived. He heard the crunch of snowshoes first, then saw a small, determined figure making her way up his drive. It was Martha from the general store, a large wicker basket in her arms. She was a woman in her 70s with silver hair and eyes that had seen enough of life not to be surprised by anything. Saw your truck tracks yesterday before the worst of it hit, she said by way of greeting as he opened the door, her breath pluming in the frigid air. Figured you might be low on something, and I know how you men forget the important things. Her eyes immediately fell on the scene by the fireplace, and a slow, gentle smile spread across her face. Well now, looks like you found some trouble. She stepped inside, uninvited but not unwelcome, and set the basket on the table. It was filled with supplies, high-quality puppy formula, fresh meat, bandages, antiseptic, and a thermos of what smelled like chicken soup. My son, David, he was Army, she said softly, her gaze distant for a moment. He always said the best part of the uniform was the people, and the dogs you got to save. He would have liked what you did here. She looked at Elias, her gaze direct and compassionate, and he felt his armor crack a little more. She did not press. She did not ask questions. She simply saw, and she understood. She helped him feed the puppies the formula and showed him how to make a warm compress for Sheba's wound. Her presence was a quiet comfort, a reminder that community existed, even for a man who had tried his best to outrun it. 2 days later, the plows cleared the main road, and Aris Thorne's jeep crawled its way up the mountain pass. She was younger than he had expected, with kind, intelligent eyes and a practical, no-nonsense demeanor that he immediately respected. She moved with a quiet confidence, her hands gentle as she examined Sheba, who submitted to the stranger's touch with a quiet dignity, as if she knew this woman was there to help. You saved her life, Aris said, looking up at Elias as she administered an antibiotic shot. Another few hours out there, and none of them would have made it. The splint you made was perfect. You have some training. Something like that, he grunted, watching her work. She turned her attention to the puppies, checking them over. Buddy, the foolish hero, tried to chew on her stethoscope, earning a soft laugh from the veterinarian. But when she reached for Shadow, he shrank back, pressing himself into the folds of the blanket, a low whimper escaping him. "This one's had a rough start," Eris observed, her voice gentle. "He's terrified. He's going to need a lot of patience. He'll bond to one person, and it will be a fierce protective bond. Looks like he's already chosen you." Elias looked down at the small, dark puppy cowering near his boot. He felt that same protective surge, stronger this time. It was a feeling he recognized. It was the bond between a handler and his dog, a sacred trust forged in shared hardship. He had thought he would never feel it again after Rex. He found himself talking, the words coming out before he could stop them. "I had a dog, Rex, in the service. He was my partner." It was the most he had said about his past to anyone in 2 years. Eris just nodded, her eyes full of an unspoken understanding. She did not offer pity, for which he was grateful. She offered something better, respect. The days that followed settled into a new routine, one dictated not by rigid discipline, but by the needs of his unexpected charges. The cabin was no longer silent. It was filled with the soft whimpers of the puppies, the gentle thumps of Sheba's tail against the floor, and the skittering of Buddy's paws as he chased dust motes in the sunbeams. The sterile odor was gone, replaced by comfortable, lived-in chaos. There were puppy pads by the door, bowls of food on the floor, and chew toys scattered across the rug. Elias found himself sleeping on the couch, wanting to be close by, in case Sheba needed him during the night. The fortress had become a nursery. The soldier had become a caregiver. He was thawing, the internal winter slowly giving way to a tentative spring. He even found himself smiling, a real, unforced smile, when Buddy, in a fit of heroic enthusiasm, tried to rescue a log from the woodpile and ended up rolling down the stack in a clumsy, furry avalanche. The knock on his door a week later was sharp and official. It was not the gentle tap of Martha or the friendly rap of Eris. Elias opened it to find a man in a crisp animal control uniform. He was tall and lean, with a clipboard in his hand and an expression that was professionally impassive. "And, Mr. Vance, I'm Officer Henderson. We had a report of stray animals at this location." Elias's body went rigid. The armor slammed back into place, cold and hard. "They're not strays," he said, his voice flat. "They're with me." Henderson peered past him into the cabin, his eyes taking in the scene. Sheba, whose leg was now in a proper cast from Eris, lifted her head and let out a low, warning growl. "I see that," Henderson said, making a note on his clipboard. "Sir, the law in this county is clear. Unregistered animals, especially an injured one, need to be brought to the county shelter for a mandatory evaluation and quarantine period. We need to check for diseases, assess the mother's temperament, and make sure the pups are viable for adoption." Every word was a hammer blow to the fragile world Elias was building. Shelter, quarantine, adoption. The words meant separation. They meant taking this family, this unit he had fought to save, and shattering it into pieces. "They're not going anywhere," Elias stated, his voice dropping to the low, dangerous tone he had once used on battlefields. He positioned himself squarely in the doorway, a human wall. Henderson sighed, a man clearly used to this kind of resistance. "Sir, I understand you've grown attached. You did a good thing rescuing them. But the law is the law. They need to be processed. The mother has no tags, no chip. For all we know, she could belong to someone. The puppies will be put up for adoption once they're weaned and vaccinated." He paused, his gaze softening slightly. "You can, of course, put in an application to adopt them yourself, but they have to go through the system first. It's for their own safety." The institutional logic was infuriating. It was a set of rules that could not comprehend reality of the situation. It could not see the trust in Sheba's eyes, or the way Shadow finally, tentatively, licked his hand that morning. "Their safety is here." "With me," Elias said. the words tasting like a declaration of war. I'm not here to argue, Mr. Vance, Henderson said, his professional mask back in place. The storm has created a backlog, so I can give you 48 hours to prepare them for transport. I'll be back on Friday morning with a vehicle. Please have them ready. He handed Elias a pamphlet for the county shelter, turned, and walked back to his truck, leaving Elias standing in the cold, a storm of fury and fear raging inside him. He had found a new mission, a new reason to fight, and now the world, with its rules and its clipboards, was trying to take it away. He looked at the 3 dogs by the fire, his family. He would not fail them. The 48-hour deadline hung over the cabin like a death sentence. The warmth and fragile peace of the past week were replaced by a tense, heavy silence. Elias paced the floor, his mind a whirlwind of tactical scenarios, none of them viable. He could not run, the mountain was a trap, and the dogs were in no condition to travel. He could not fight the law head-on, that was a battle he could not win. He felt trapped, the walls of his own cabin closing in on him. He called Aris, his voice tight, with a desperation he despised. She was sympathetic but pragmatic. Henderson was just doing his job. She explained. The system was rigid. She promised to make some calls, to vouch for him, but she could not guarantee anything. He spent the time cementing his bond with the animals, as if memorizing them before they were ripped away. He sat on the floor, letting Buddy chew on his bootlaces, while he spoke in low tones to Sheba, whose head rested in his lap. His focus, however, was on Shadow. The fearful puppy had made tremendous progress, no longer flinching at his touch. He would now crawl into Elias's lap, a warm, trusting weight against his chest. Elias would stroke the puppy's dark fur, feeling the frantic, tiny heartbeat, and make a silent vow. He would not be taken. Not this one. This one was his to protect. The quiet, watchful soul had become a mirror, and to save him felt like saving a piece of himself. The night before Henderson was due to return, the weather turned again. The sky, which had been a brilliant, clear blue, grew dark and ominous. The wind began to howl once more, rattling the windows of the cabin. Another blizzard was rolling in, this one projected to be even worse than the first. A bitter, cold dread settled in Elias's stomach. It felt like the universe itself was conspiring against him. He checked the fire, secured the shutters, and brought in an extra load of firewood, his movements sharp and efficient. A man preparing for a siege. The dogs were restless, sensing the change in barometric pressure and in his own tense energy. Sheba whined softly, her ears flat against her head. Buddy, for once, was subdued, staying close to his mother. Shadow trembled, his dark eyes wide with anxiety. Elias tried to soothe them, his voice a low murmur. But the atmosphere in the cabin was thick with impending doom. Around midnight, the storm hit with a terrifying explosive force. A gust of wind, stronger than any before it, slammed into the cabin. It was followed by a deafening crack, like a rifle shot magnified 1,000 times, and then a tremendous earth-shaking crash. The entire cabin shuddered. A massive pine tree, weakened by age and battered by the wind, had fallen, its great trunk slamming against the side of the cabin. It had taken out a section of the porch roof, and more critically, had crushed a portion of the fence that enclosed the small yard. In this sudden, shocking chaos, the front door, which had not been latched securely, blew open. Snow and wind blasted into the room, sending papers and embers from the hearth flying. The dogs, already on edge, panicked. Sheba barked frantically, trying to stand on her injured leg. Buddy scrambled under the table, and Shadow, the watchful, fearful soul, bolted. In a flash of dark fur, he shot through the open door and disappeared into the swirling white fury of the blizzard. "Shadow!" Elias roared, his voice swallowed by the wind. For a heart-stopping second he was frozen, the horror of the moment paralyzing him. He saw Rex, bleeding in the dust. He saw Sarah's car, crumpled and broken. Loss, swift and brutal, was coming for him again. Then the paralysis broke, shattered by a surge of pure adrenaline. He did not think. He reacted. He grabbed his heaviest coat, a powerful flashlight, and plunged out into the storm after the puppy. The world outside was a nightmare of blinding snow and screaming wind. The temperature had plummeted, and the cold was a physical assault, stealing his breath and burning his exposed skin. He could not see more than 2 feet in front of him. "Shadow!" he bellowed again and again, his voice raw. He swept the beam of the flashlight back and forth, praying for a glimpse of dark fur against the white, for the reflection of two small eyes. He followed the broken section of the fence, figuring the terrified puppy would have followed the familiar line. His old shoulder injury screamed in protest against the cold, a deep grinding pain. His knee, where he'd taken shrapnel years ago, began to ache with a vengeance. He ignored it all. The mission was all that mattered. Find the puppy. Bring him home. He pushed deeper into the woods, the snow now up to his thighs. Each step a monumental effort. He was operating on pure instinct, the finely honed tracking skills from his SEAL days taking over. He looked for broken branches, for any sign of passage, but the snow was covering everything within seconds. Despair, a cold and familiar enemy, began to creep into the edges of his consciousness. He was too late. The puppy was too small, too fragile. He could not possibly survive this. Elias pushed the thought away with savage force. He would not accept it. He would not fail again. He found him by a small miracle. The beam of his flashlight caught something dark, huddled at the base of a rock. Outcropping, partially sheltered from the wind, but already covered in a thick layer of snow. It was Shadow. He was curled into a tight ball, shivering so violently that Elias could see the movement from 10 feet away. He scrambled over to the puppy, his heart pounding in his chest. Shadow was alive, but just barely. His fur was stiff with ice, his body frighteningly cold to the touch. He whimpered weakly when Elias reached for him. Elias did what he had done before. He ripped open his coat and tucked the freezing puppy inside against his own skin, trying to share his body heat. He turned to head back, but the blizzard had erased his tracks. He was disoriented, the swirling snow a confusing hypnotic vortex. For a moment a flicker of real fear touched him, not for himself, but for the small life he held in his hands. He took a breath, forced the fear down, and focused. He remembered the compass in his pocket. He remembered the feel of the terrain under his feet. He was a warrior. The storm was just another enemy combatant. He would win. He began the grueling trek back, one agonizing step at a time, shielding the precious weight in his coat with his body. As he finally stumbled out of the tree line, a pair of headlights cut through the snow. It was a county vehicle. Officer Henderson had arrived, early and determined to carry out his duty despite the storm. He stepped out of his truck just as Elias staggered into the weak circle of light, a grim, snow-covered figure, his face etched with pain and exhaustion, clutching the small bundle inside his coat. Henderson stopped dead, his mouth slightly agape. He saw the state of Elias, the raw determination in his eyes. He saw the way the man's body was curved protectively around the puppy. He saw a man who had just walked through hell to save a life. Elias stumbled past him toward the cabin door without a word, his mission not yet complete. Henderson watched him go. Then slowly he reached for the radio in his truck. "Dispatch, this is Henderson," he said, his voice different, stripped of its bureaucratic certainty. "Regarding the strays at the Vance residence, situation has changed. I'm marking the case closed. The animals are home." In that moment, watching the wounded warrior carry the tiny, broken creature to safety, Henderson had chosen to see the spirit of the law, not just the letter. He had chosen mercy. The aftermath of the storm was a period of quiet recovery and profound change. Iris arrived the next day, navigating the treacherous, tree-littered road to check on her patients. She found a scene of domestic harmony that was a world away from the sterile fortress she had first visited. Elias, exhausted but at peace, was on the floor by the fire. Shadow was asleep on his chest, Sheba's head was on his lap, and Buddy was contentedly gnawing on a toy by his side. The cabin was a mess of muddy footprints, scattered blankets, and the lingering scent of wet dog, but it felt, for the first time, like a home. Eris treated the scratches Elias had sustained during the rescue, her touch gentle, her eyes saying everything her words did not need to. A new kind of family had been forged in the crucible of the storm. It was a strange, patched-together unit, a broken soldier, a resilient mother dog, a foolishly brave puppy, and a watchful soul who was learning to trust again. They were all survivors, bound together by a shared ordeal and an unspoken pact of mutual protection. The institutional threat had vanished, replaced by a network of quiet support. Martha dropped off a casserole and a bag of premium dog food. Iris made regular house calls, her visits becoming less about veterinary care and more about shared cups of coffee and easy conversation. She and Elias spoke of the future, not of the past. Elias found he had a new mission. It was not one of danger and adrenaline, but of patience and care. He worked with Shadow every day, gently coaxing him out of his shell, celebrating small victories like a wag of the tail or a playful bark. He helped Sheba with her physical therapy, his strong hands supporting her as she slowly began to put weight on her healed leg. He threw sticks for Buddy, and for the first time in years, the sound of his own genuine laughter echoed through the mountain valley. The walls he had built around his heart had not just been breached, they had been demolished, and in their place, something new and vibrant was being built. The transformation extended beyond the cabin. Spurred on by Eris and Martha, Elias started a small informal rescue service for the remote mountain community. His truck, once a symbol of his isolation, became a vehicle of hope. His skills, once used for war, were repurposed for mercy. He rescued animals stranded by rock slides, found lost pets after storms, and helped build stronger enclosures for his neighbors. He was no longer the town recluse. He was the quiet, capable man you called when you needed help. He was a protector again, but his definition of the word had expanded. One evening in late spring, as the last rays of the sun painted the peaks in hues of gold and rose, Elias sat on his newly repaired porch. Sheba was lying at his feet, her leg completely healed, her amber eyes soft and content. Buddy was chasing fireflies in the yard, a blur of joyful incompetence, while Shadow lay pressed against Elias's side, his head resting on his thigh, completely at ease. Eris was there, sitting in the chair beside him, a comfortable silence between them. The air was warm, filled with the scent of pine and damp earth. He reached into the cabin and retrieved a small wooden box from the mantelpiece. From it, he took a tarnished silver harmonica. It had been Sarah's. He had not been able to touch it since she died. He brought it to his lips, his calloused fingers finding their familiar place, and played. It was not a sad song, nor a happy one. It was a simple, quiet melody, a tune that spoke of loss and survival, of grief that had been integrated, not erased. It was a song of peace. The notes floated out into the twilight, a testament to the wounded warrior who had gone into the storm to rescue a dog, and in doing so, had finally managed to rescue himself. The rescuer had been rescued, and his new mission surrounded by his found family was just beginning.